So brain health, that's the topic of the lecture. And basically, when it comes down to it, a lot of times, whenever it comes to one of these things, I like to, whenever I'm doing a lecture, it's part of the reason is like, why should you actually listen to what I'm talking about? And it's because I put a lot of time in. I guess it's the best thing, not to be too conceited about it, but basically, like, I've spent a lot of time studying neurology, and there are lots of things to learn when it comes to this. So I'm a board certified functional neurologist. Basically, I have over 900 hours worth of postgraduate education within neurology. The DACNB that I have in the alphabet soup that I have behind my name is basically something that has to do with treating functional problems. So the idea is that, you know, the things that you see on some of these that people might have might not be something that you can find on an MRI or other kinds of stuff like that. But it's still, people can have issues that you can still help them to feel better. So that's the general idea with that. There's a bunch of other certifications. A lot of that has to do with sports science and sports medicine and trying to make sure that people get out of pain. But the brain-based rehabilitation that I do is something that is a little bit different. So that's basically that. And then I teach this anatomy and physiology, neurophysiology and stuff like that in anatomy and physiology because I'm an instructor over at Owens. So this is something that I do on again, a fairly regular basis. So getting into the idea of what we're talking about, we're obviously talking about the brain. And without getting into too much, hopefully you don't consider it boring because I don't, but talking about some of the anatomy, basically talking about the brain, obviously it's the main control center that we have in our body. It is a very complex organ that is going to control things like intelligence, all of the senses that you feel, body movement, behavior, and things along those lines. So there's a bunch of different stuff that we can get into, and people don't know everything about the brain as it is, but there's a whole lot that we've learned in the past 10 years compared to what we used to know. Like obviously centuries ago, we didn't know where intelligence sat and other kinds of stuff. So it's a whole lot that we have gotten for figuring out where issues are or what things actually control problems when it comes to the brain. It weighs about 3 pounds. It's about 2% of the whole body weight. But the interesting thing is that while it only makes up about 2% of the body weight, the brain actually takes up way more energy from the standpoint of like blood supply compared to the rest of the body. It's somewhere around 10% of the blood supply or the energy that we have that's going through our body ends up going to our brain. And that's kind of a big deal. And that's just because the brain is so metabolically active. And anybody that has done any kind of thing where you have to pay attention for any long period of time, you will know that if you have to do like continuing education hours or any of that kind of stuff, that just paying attention to one thing for a long period of time will drain you just as much sometimes as doing something that's physical for hours and hours on end. So it depends on what's going on with that. But again, that's something that can cause a decent amount of fatigue. The brain itself is going to end up being divided up into 3 different subsections. So there's the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. And it makes sense on where they are. So the forebrain is going to be up in the front part that's right up in here. The midbrain is going to, like in all of this, ends up typically being the forebrain. The midbrain is going to be kind of the middle. And the hindbrain is going to end up being the section that's going to be in the back. And basically, we're going to take a couple of looks at each of the different sections that are there. So the part of the forebrain that's there, that's up in the front, and again, if you can kind of see, let's see here, kind of on this picture here, right? So the sections that you end up having up in here on that picture, hopefully you guys can see that laser pointer that I've got going on. But that part of the brain that you can see, that is going to be the largest part. So it's the front part here, and it's all the way to the back, all through here. Okay, that's considered to be all of the forebrain, even though it wraps all the way around to the back. It's really talking about like if you're not upright but being forward, that this is the most advanced part of it. It's the last part to develop in people. You know, so when it comes to decision-making processes and different stuff like that, your spinal cord is going to develop way before that. So The midbrain is going to end up being in the section that's in being here, and that's going to end up being part of the brainstem. So this part kind of down and through here is all part of the midbrain. And again, back to the forebrain for a second, that is going to be what is considered to be the cerebrum. So that's the largest part of the brain, again, and that has the most developed kind of senses and where most of the processing takes place. The hindbrain, on the other hand, is going to end up being this posterior part that's back here and a little bit lower parts of the brain and the spinal cord and stuff like that in the back. And this is the cerebellum. And there'll be another picture here in a second so you can actually see it. But the general idea is that when it comes down to it, we end up having a whole lot of different things that they're going to be in this section, lots of different parts to know. So going back to the cerebrum for a second, the cerebrum is one of the main parts. The cerebrum ends up being the largest part of the brain. It has a right and a left hemisphere. So there's a right side of it, and then there's a left side of it. And then you end up having 4 different lobes. There's the frontal lobe that's in the front, that's up in the front, back up and through here. There's a parietal lobe that's here on the side. And then you end up having the occipital lobe that's going to be more in the back side back here. And then the temporal lobe is going to be on the side. And each of those has slightly different functions. There's separations in the brain between what it does, again, a little bit right and left, and also within the brain itself. So the frontal lobe has the tendency to do more things with memory. Well, it has memory, it has other kinds of stuff with it. Memory is kind of spread out all throughout the brain, but the frontal lobe does some memory, but it does behavior, it does actual movement. So all of the movement kind of things of actually telling your body to move is going to be coming from that frontal lobe. Parietal lobe is going to have to do more with sensation. So again, bodily type of sensations, so again, bodily type of sensations, and then they're like, so pressure, pain, light touch, temperature, those kind of things are all going to be felt in the parietal lobe. The temporal lobe, again, on the side, that has to do a lot with memory, about laying down memory, but it also has to do with hearing, so sound and stuff like that. And then the occipital lobe in the back is mainly to do with vision. So those are the main different parts of the cerebrum. The brainstem itself is going to end up being the section, again, that's going to be down in through here, right? So all of this part in through there is all brainstem. And again, it's composed of the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla, the 3 different parts that you end up getting in the brainstem. The cerebellum in the back is going to have to do with movement. And there's a bunch of different stuff that goes into that. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a second. And in between the cerebrum and the brainstem, up in this area, is going to be in part with the thalamus and the hypothalamus. And we'll talk about that all here in one sec. So in general, you end up having this picture, and this kind of gives you an idea of what's going on, but let's go to one that actually shows a little bit more of the actual parts of the brain. So when you talk about the cerebrum, again, the frontal lobe is going to have to do with memory. It also has to do with planning, imagining, thinking, all of that kind of stuff. The parietal lobe, again, the sensation and different things, sensory stimuli, spatial orientation, knowing where you are in space. You know, somebody that might have a problem with their parietal lobe might not know where things are in their room, or being able to find things in the dark and things like that. The temporal lobe, again, that's going to be sound and language. There's some other stuff that's a little bit lower that is associated with it. Again, the memory and those kind of things. And then in the back is going to end up being the occipital lobe. And the occipital lobe is going to have to do with visual processing. So it allows you to see something, and then it is associated with other memory areas in order for you to actually be able to recognize friends or read a book or understand. It gets associated with language as well. So there's a lot of different things that get all incorporated in that. So the diencephalon is this other area, and this is kind of in between, and this has to do with the thalamus. So this area of the diencephalon, it has to do with the thalamus, then it has to do with the hypothalamus. And these are areas that are going to be, basically, they're not areas that you don't consciously feel anything in these areas, but they're involved in relay stations for the most part. So when it comes to the thalamus, this is a relay station. So you end up getting information that happens in your hand, and it's going to go up through your arm to your spinal cord, up into the thalamus, and then it relays it to the different areas up inside of the actual cerebrum. The hypothalamus has to do with the basically it has to do with the pituitary gland, and it has to do with regulating autonomics. So a lot of, like the circadian rhythms and things of going to sleep and how all of that kind of stuff, that is typically going to end up being regulated by that hypothalamus. The cerebellum in the back, again, has to do with movement. So it's all about coordinating muscles. It's about coordinating movements. And there's a very complex interaction that goes in between the cerebrum that's up on top, and especially the frontal lobe, along with the parietal lobe, to talk with the cerebellum in order to actually to tell you to do a movement and be accurate with the movements that you actually make. And then the brainstem itself is going to end up having other parts of homeostasis, helping to control different aspects of breathing, different aspects of your blood pressure and heart rate, your sympathetic nervous system, your parasympathetics, those kind of things. So again, body temperature, all of these different things are going to end up being controlled here in that brainstem. So, but the thing that's interesting is that while this is going to be the largest area and a lot of processing takes place there, the most number of connections that we have in the body, actually, like the most number of neurons that we have synapsing or connecting together, are actually going to be within the cerebellum. So there's a whole lot of this, and all of these different things can do a lot of, all of those different areas have a lot of coordination that works in between them all. So the left brain and the right brain. So there's, again, the different halves of the brain. So the right brain is going to be on the right, and obviously the left brain's on the left. But those are going to end up being connected together by something called the corpus callosum. Things don't happen by themselves. There's an attempt to coordinate the things that happen on the left side of the brain with the things that happen on the right side of the brain. We do know that just like there's division of function between the front side and the back side. So just because we end up having function between the left side and the right sides of the brain, and I think that I lost something on the computer here, so let me just double check. There we go. Okay, hopefully you guys didn't lose the picture there. My one computer went out. So, So just because you end up having the different things between the right side and the left side of the brain, and there's divisions in where different things happen in the brain. So again, behavior happens more in the frontal lobe, movement happens in the frontal lobe, the sensory information happens in the parietal lobe. There's also divisions among those different things between the left and the right. And one of the examples of that ends up being speech and language comprehension. So both of those are actually located on the left side of the brain. There's an area called Broca's area, which ends up being more in the frontal lobe. And that has to do with actually speaking, actually making the words come out of someone's mouth. So that's Broca's. There's an area that's further back that's called Wernicke's area, and that has to do with comprehending speech. So there's a difference between the two, and there's different kind of problems that you can have, where if you had a problem up in the front with this Broca's area, somebody wouldn't be able to actually speak to other people, but if you spoke to them, they would understand what you were saying, but they couldn't actually get the words out the right way. Whereas if you had the other area damaged, you wouldn't be able to speak very well, but then you also wouldn't be able to understand. And you also wouldn't be able to write it either. So there's multiple different parts to that. So an example, like when people know about strokes and stuff like that, the acronym that you can use in order to help someone out, to make sure that they take care of the stroke in a timely manner, is FAST. So F-A-S-T, and the F in that one stands for face. So somebody that has a drooping type of a face where they don't have the right kind of control is going to be part of it. The other thing that you would have is going to be A, which would be M. So if you're going to be having somebody try to bring their arms up in front of them, if they don't have the ability to bring that arm up, then that would be another one. S in the FAST is going to stand for speech, and speech, again, is something that can be altered. And then T is time, because you want to make sure that you are taking into consideration how long that the person has had the issue when you get them assistance. And of those, again, you don't necessarily get all of them at the same time. It could be any one of those. And again, not everybody ends up having a problem with speech. If you have a left-sided stroke, you're going to end up causing an issue depending on where it is, possibly with speech, but not all the time. Sometimes people will have an issue, sometimes they won't. It depends on the issue, and it depends on where in the area they actually had the problem. So that's some of that. But to go back to the left and right stuff, the left and right, there was a theory that basically talks about how the left side being dominant or the right side being dominant have different kind of thinking styles that are associated with people. And the person who came up with that theory, they basically won the Nobel Prize back in 1981 regarding that theory. So again, it has weight to it, but again, it's not a everybody is either left brain or right brain. You have different components of each of them, but somebody might have a little bit more right brain type of function, or maybe a little bit more left brain type of function, depending on who they are and what they do and what their interests are and everything else. So the general kind of idea, and again, this is a generality, again, besides the idea of the left brain actually controlling the right side of the body, right? That's true, but a lot of the information actually stays on the same side. But conscious control does switch from side to side. But besides that, people that are said to be left brain thinkers or are more left brain dominant are thought to be more logical, analytical, objective, different things along those lines. So other kinds of traits would be language, again, being on the left side, logic being on the left side, critical thinking, working with numbers, reasoning, or someone's just IQ just in general ends up being things that are associated with the left side of the brain. When it comes to the right side of the brain is going to be someone who is going to be more intuitive, thoughtful, maybe subjective in what they're doing as opposed to being objective. So other traits of somebody who might be right brain might be being able to recognize faces maybe a little bit better, having better recognition of expression of emotion in other people, and even sometimes in themselves. Music, again, there's different facets of music that can be on either side, but the harmonies and stuff of music would be more of the right brain. Reading, seeing certain colors or seeing like vividness of colors or being able to differentiate colors a little bit better might be somebody who's more right brain. Having more imagination or intuition or creativity, or just the general idea, again, going back to emotion of EQ or like that emotional quotient. So being able to recognize emotion in other people would be another thing. So, and you can kind of see how that, all that kind of stuff goes in this kind of picture here, because this is kind of cool from the standpoint of, you know, again, seeing all the equations and stuff versus the splashes of color and everything that's there. So I like that picture because it kind of like gives you a demonstration of what it is that we're talking about. So when it comes to neurological disorders, again, this being about brain health, the general idea is that there's things that you can do in order to try to prevent certain neurological disorders. So let's talk a little bit about the neurological disorders and what that actually composed of. So again, why it's important is that if you have a healthy brain, your brain is going to function quickly. It's going to do things more automatically. You're not going to have basically dysfunction is the best way to say it. So homeostasis and having everything work the way that it should is the ideal. That's the normal. That's the way that things should happen. But that's not the way that it always works for everybody. So the idea is that we want to actually try to have the brain work as well as it can for as long as it can. So about 1 in 5 people in the US suffers from a neurological disorder. Again, different diseases of the brain, the spine, the nerves that are connecting to them. And there's multiple different types of disorders. So just a few of them would be like, well, most of them here are going to be neurogenic types of disorders. So things like Huntington's disease or muscular dystrophy. There's developmental disorders like cerebral palsy. There is degenerative diseases that you get as you get to be an adult. So neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease. There's other metabolic diseases. So if you have problems with the endocrine system or problems with electrolyte imbalance, issues with the kidney or the liver, brain hypoxia or like nutritional problems, those are all issues with metabolic diseases. Cerebrovascular diseases would be stroke, or if a person had a problem with vascular dementia that you develop based on a decrease in blood flow to the brain. Other neurobehavioral types of disorders would be things like ADHD or autism. You can also have spinal trauma or head injuries, concussions, mild traumatic brain injuries, things along those lines. Other kinds of convulsive types of disorders, epilepsy or other types of movement disorders. There's infections, there's brain tumors, there's all of that kind of stuff. So we're not going to talk about all of those because that's a lot of stuff. but we will talk about a few of them. So one of the first ones to talk about is dementia. And dementia is obviously a big deal, but dementia in and of itself is more of a symptom. It's not actually a specific disease. But dementia by itself is considered to be cerebrovascular most of the time, unless you have something else, which is, for example, Alzheimer's, which we'll talk about in a second. So again, there's a wide range of symptoms. And again, in order for somebody to be considered to have dementia, again, usually you need to have at least two of the following things typically be impaired with somebody. So a person's memory would need to have issues, problems with communication or language or how they actually talk, the ability to focus or pay attention, reasoning and judgment, visual perception. All of those things would be examples of problems that people can have. And typically it's brain cell damage that happens or problems that happens over time that causes that type of short-term memory loss. And there's multiple different things. Again, most of the time these dementias are going to progress and get worse as time goes by. Like typically people can have good days and bad days, just like you can in Alzheimer's. But again, as things progress and move along, things have the tendency to get worse. And in general, there's certain things that you can do with all of these diseases to basically mitigate or try to prevent things as much as possible or try to reduce your risk as much as possible. So for example, when it comes to dementia, since it is a cerebrovascular problem, typically trying to control cardiovascular risk factors ends up being one of the things that you can do. So losing weight, exercise, those kind of things in order to control it and make sure that your blood pressure is not too high are all different examples of ways that you can help it. So again, physical exercise in of itself, not just doing the cardiovascular risk factors, but the exercise itself actually is a big deal from the standpoint of the movement in the brain. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Diet ends up being another big issue. So when it comes to diet, you need to make sure that you're eating healthy stuff and that you're not eating stuff that comes out of a window on a regular basis and take that home in your car all the time. That's, obviously not going to be a good situation. So when you talk about diet, just in general, we could do an entirely separate one about diet, but the general idea with diet is that when you go to the grocery store, go to, fresh markets as much as you possibly can. Not necessarily that brand, but going to like a market or going to somewhere and buying fresh produce is going to be one of the best options. Or if you go to the grocery store, staying around the outside of the grocery store as opposed to going through the aisles in the middle as much as possible. I'm not saying that you have to avoid it completely, but the more that you can actually avoid processed foods and things like that, the better off it's going to be. So those are some of the things that when it comes to that. So Alzheimer's ends up being a different issue. Alzheimer's is actually a degenerative disease as opposed to being the cardiovascular version of it. So all types of Alzheimer's are dementia, but not all dementias are Alzheimer's. And again, the thing to remember with this kind of stuff is that it's not actually normal for people to get really, really, really forgetful as they get older. A little bit of issues maybe like with things maybe aren't quite as sharp or as fast or that kind of stuff is common, but it's not normal. It's not something that you should be basically blaming everything on when it comes down to the issues that somebody has on a regular basis. So just because somebody's 80 years old doesn't mean that they should be slowing down. I have patients that are going to be 70, 72 that are still jumping out of the back of the pickup truck and doing all kinds of manual labor and walking out. And she gets upset when she jumps out of the back of the pickup truck and her knee's bothering her. So again, there's all kinds of different ranges to it, but that's that kind of movement or being sharp when you're older. Again, that's the way that it really should be. So again, going back to Alzheimer's specifically though, is that again, it's a degenerative type of disease. It is the most common form of dementia. And again, there's issues with memory, thinking, behavior, speech, all of those kind of things. So basically 1 in 10 people over the age of 65 has Alzheimer's. Again, this is over 5 million Americans, which is a whole lot. And then early onset Alzheimer's is when it happens to somebody who is under the age of 65. And that is going to be affecting about approximately 200,000 Americans. So, but the issue with all this stuff, though, is that the changes in the brain will actually show up long before the person starts to show symptoms. And again, with this, there's issues that you can do in order to help to prevent it. So overconsumption of fats and carbohydrates, and again, the same kind of stuff that we were talking about before, like foods that isn't necessarily so good for you is going to be part of it. If somebody has type 2 diabetes, they actually have their risk of Alzheimer's that ends up being doubled. So you end up having a lot higher risk of having Alzheimer's if you have type 2 diabetes. And again, just like the cardiovascular stuff, heart disease is also going to increase the risk of dementia because you end up having issues with arterial stiffness and other kinds of stuff. And there's an association with the development of the beta amyloid plaque that develops in the brain, which is one of the hallmark things. There's tau protein, and there's neurofibrillary tangles, and there's all kinds of other stuff. And they're trying to work on things, but it's not necessarily where we want it to be just yet. So you need to do as much as you can in order to make sure that you stay healthy for as long as possible. So we're going to get into some of those here in a little bit after we talk a little bit more about some of the possible issues. So stroke is another thing. Stroke is going to end up being an attack that's on the brain. So basically, brain attack or different stuff like that, as opposed to a heart attack. And basically the idea is that you disrupt the flow to the brain. And it could be from getting a clot, or it could be from an artery actually like breaking or exploding. Obviously that's not good, because the areas of the brain that get supplied by that artery, they would die because they don't have the oxygen in the blood that they need. So it depends on where it happens in the brain. They can be large, big strokes, or they can end up being smaller ones, or you can end up getting something that's even less than that, like a TIA or a transient ischemic attack, which would be something that happens in really, really small areas, and it only happens for a short period of time, again, transient, and then it disappears. But people that get TIAs are at a higher risk of having a stroke than somebody that's normal. So when it comes down to the areas of where it ends up being an issue, again, because one side of the brain affects the opposite sides of the body, and again, it has to do with motor control, that if you end up having a stroke that's on the right side of the brain, you can typically have paralysis on the left side of the body. So if you have a stroke over on the right side, you end up having paralysis that's on the left. There are visual problems that you can get. There is issues with other kinds of behavior, again, being quick or inquisitive or different stuff like that, or issues with memory loss, which can actually be on both sides. And then with a stroke on the left side, again, that's going to affect the right side of the body. That can be, again, the speech and the language problems that we had talked about before. The person can end up being more slow and cautious because they don't have their left brain to push them, which left brain has the tendency to make somebody go, go, go. Right brain has to make somebody slow down. And be more cautious with some of the things that they do. And again, there's a whole lot of strokes. About 800,000 new or recurrent strokes can happen each year, but up to 80% of those strokes can end up being prevented. And stroke ends up being the 5th leading cause of death in the US, and it's the leading cause of adult disability in the US. So there's a bunch of different stuff with that. Again, we mentioned FAST before. Again, the face, the arm, and the lifting it and making sure that it comes up the right amount, and the speech, and then making sure that you are taking into account how long that it's been since the person has actually had those symptoms is important. So when it comes to different ways that you can prevent, one of the examples would be talking about in kids. So childhood neurological problems. And there's, again, this is a general kind of a thing. There's multiple different ways that you can go at and approach this, but one of them ends up being nutrition. Again, if this is one of those kind of things that, I'm not saying that when it comes to this that you have to be 100% all the time with these kind of things, but again, it's the majority of the things that you do. So that means that the kid, it's not that a kid should never have chicken nuggets. It just means that, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that that should be something that they're getting every day over and over and over again. So that's, or something that's the equivalent of that. So from the standpoint of how to deal with this, again, you're talking about nutrition. So local and organic type of products, again, if you can get organic, if you can afford it, then the better it is for kids. Again, reducing the intake of pesticides. Pesticides have a lot of different issues that they can affect hormones and other kinds of stuff that act as estrogens within the body, let alone just the toxic aspect of it. So other kinds of things would be helping, making sure that they drink a good deal of water and avoiding those heavily processed foods, avoiding things that have trans fats, high amounts of sugars, artificial sweeteners. So usually all the kids that, all the things that kids absolutely love, those are usually the things that are probably not all that great for them. So again, it's not to say that they can never have something, but again, that shouldn't be the go-to on a regular basis. So other things that you can do for kids is helping to make sure that your environment is toxic free as possible. So trying to use as much natural cleaners that you can around the house, trying to get, avoiding fabrics or avoiding different couches or different things that end up having a lot of flame retardant on them. So natural fiber type of furniture, different stuff like that can be definitely a good thing. Other types of skin irritants and different stuff like that, cloth diapers if you can, other types of natural sunscreens, again, being smart about it. But again, these are a lot of different things that can affect the body. And again, making sure that they're getting exercise. Again, the kids should not learn how to use an iPad too early. Like my kids, I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, and with the two of them, they barely know how to use an iPad. And I think that that's something that can be extremely important to make sure that they get out and play, that they're being creative, and that they're going from there. Other kinds of stimulation, new types of things, limiting screen time, all of those different things are going to be able to help them develop healthily as they should. Again, and making sure that you're at least paying attention to the milestones. You don't necessarily have to set a clock to it and make sure that you are booking out or writing out exactly whenever the kid should be doing whatever thing, but you should be taking a look at that as like a gauge, because if you're a couple of months off, then that is definitely something that should be thought about to bring it up to a pediatrician or somebody else that might be able to help. So when it comes to the adult prevention that's there, from the standpoint of adult prevention, it's going to be a lot of the same stuff. So again, making sure that the person is going to be getting enough exercise. That again ends up being something that is extremely important, because without getting too involved in it, again, every time that you end up doing a movement, so if you are going to move your finger up and down like this, or if somebody were to do it for you, you end up knowing whether or not your finger is moving up or down. Again, if you're doing it yourself, it's one thing, but if somebody is actually bending your finger up or down, you should be able to know what's happening. If somebody goes and they put you into a position on one side and they have you shut your eyes, you should be able to mimic that same thing on the opposite side. So it ends up being an important thing, because you need to know where your body is in space. And the more that you exercise and the more that you take care of your physical health and do different things that maybe you're not used to, the more that you can actually stimulate the brain in order to do different things. Again, physical like exercise is going to be something that can help with depression and a whole host of different issues, stress and all kinds of stuff. Making sure that you take care of diet and nutrition, making sure that you actually have cognitive activities that are going to help take care of yourself. So when it comes down to some of the issues that you can have, again, cognitive activity ends up being something that's important. When you start talking about dementia and when you talk about Alzheimer's, one of the things that ends up being or playing a role with each of those things ends up being what the person's job is or was, right? So if the person ends up doing a task that is going to be repetitive and the same thing over and over again, and there doesn't need to necessarily be a lot of thought or planning with what they're doing, then that's going to be something that is not going to challenge your brain. It's not going to push you, and it's not going to help to protect you. Versus if somebody is doing like a professional type of a job. So if you have to, even like a mechanic, right? If a mechanic has to figure out and diagnose what's wrong with a car, they have to use their brain. They have to think through the different processes and the different steps, and then have to remember how to fix it and how to do the different things from there. So again, that doing the extra having to think ends up being something that ends up being protective against getting dementia and Alzheimer's and stuff like that. If in the fact for just delaying its onset for 10 years or something like that. And again, there are some situations where you can't avoid it and somebody will maybe have a genetic predisposition for getting Alzheimer's, but the more that you actually work towards preventing it, the more that you can push it off so that you wouldn't get Alzheimer's until you're 90 versus getting Alzheimer's when you're 70 or 60 or 55, right? If it's, you're talking early onset. So there's multiple different things with that. And the other thing that goes with that is going to end up being social engagement. So when it comes to social engagement, again, getting out, getting together with friends and kind of going from there. So again, multiple different kinds of things that are associated with each of those. So again, talking about breaking a sweat, again, the physical activity and the reduced risk of cognitive decline is definitely connected. So the more that you can increase that physical activity, the more that you get your heart rate up, you would control other issues that would be associated with the cardiovascular risk factors and stuff like that. But if you can do something and actually get socially engaged at the same time, then fantastic. So going for a walk with a friend and talking, doing a dance class, get some kind of exercise group where, whether or not it's CrossFit or another group where they're doing things in a group together, going golfing with some buddies, taking a tennis lesson, or learning how to do a new sport. Again, challenging yourself in multiple different ways. Getting into a community pool, learning to swim if you don't know how to swim, doing triathlons if you don't know, or if you've never done a triathlon before. Go for a bike ride. Again, you should be doing about 150 minutes of exercise per week. And again, that should be 10-minute sessions at least. You can break them up multiple different times in the week. But again, 2 days a week of muscle strengthening activity should be a part of that. So just to kind of get stronger and work on things from there. Again, so again, other kinds of stuff. Again, the walking, dancing, gardening, hiking, swimming, excuse me, transportation. So moving yourself from place to place, either whether or not it's by a bike or walking, moving around, making sure that you do the household chores, maybe doing them quickly so that you can actually break a sweat. So there's a bunch of different things that can be associated with that. Again, getting and working that cognitive aspect is a big part of it. So hitting the books, basically. So you can learn new tricks. You can do different things that are going to be associated with getting stronger. Again, mentally, right? So not just from a mental health standpoint, but also from a making your brain stronger. Because that's basically what we're talking about here, is that it's taking care of your brain and making sure that your brain is healthy is basically the equivalent of doing exercises for your muscles. If you're lifting weights, you're trying to push the weight and you're trying to lift weights that are heavier than what you normally lift. In order to if this is what you normally lift, then lifting a little bit more pushes that out, and now you can do a little bit more. And if you keep pushing it, then you're going to do a little bit more. But if you limit yourself and you were able to do this, and now you're limiting yourself to this kind of activity, then what you're able to do starts to shrink from a physical standpoint. It's the same kind of thing from a mental standpoint or a cognitive standpoint, or making sure that you're taking care of the brain health just in general. So if you are not good at Scrabble, the more that you play Scrabble, the better you're going to get at Scrabble. The more that you learn how to play another instrument, again, you're using both sides of your brain and you're doing multiple different things. So there's different aspects to this. So again, learning how to do something new, continuing education. For example, going to here, not just because I'm an instructor, but going to Owens and maybe having some of their adult education classes and learning something new, learning Tai Chi, learning Kung Fu, learning a martial art if you've never taken one. So all of those things can be good things for you to learn in order to help make your brain stay healthy and be healthy. So other resources, going to the library, going to other community centers, going to the rec center, going to a local college and finding things that you can do there. And there's other kinds of things like online that you can do. There's brain-based exercises or different types of websites that you can do some of this stuff with. So there's all kinds of different topics and there's all kinds of things that you can do. So going to a craft store, going to a home improvement store and learning a class, learning how to do something else, learning how to make your own kombucha, just teaching yourself how to sew or knit or crochet if you haven't done that before. Again, that's a fine motor type of activity. And while it might be repetitive, you still have to use fine motor skills in order to do it. And you have to learn a new skill in order to do something like that. So other kinds of club activities, learning how to quilt, gardening, all kinds of different things, taking a cooking class if you haven't done that before, learning how, a knife skills class, or different options that you can do. And then there's other stuff like online. You can use something like Skillshare.com or other kinds of places where you can, take classes and learn from, like all kinds of different stuff, whether or not it's like design, graphic design, writing, technology, photography, marketing, search engine stuff, building a website, whatever. There's all kinds of different stuff that you can do in order to, because we don't know how to do everything. So find something that's kind of within your interests, and then you can kind of go from there. Next thing to talk about would be making sure that you get rid of cigarettes, because cigarettes are obviously a huge issue. So again, cognitive decline, when it comes down to it, making sure that you kick that habit as much as you can. There's all kinds of different options. You can do acupuncture in order to help to decrease the amount of smoking or getting rid of that. There's other kinds of steps to it. Again, acupuncture isn't something that I do, but there are plenty of people around who could teach you, or who could walk you through it, and who could actually help you with the acupuncture. So again, finding that reason, again, making sure that you're not going through a cognitive decline, or making sure that you won't, again, because again, smoking just in general makes every single disease on the face of the planet worse. And you shouldn't just do it prepared. Again, sometimes you can go cold turkey, but you need to be prepared. You need to be set up. Sometimes medications can help with that. Whether or not it's replacement stuff, nicotine gum, again, that's the nicotine symptoms, but you also have to do things typically with your hands, or again, the mouth and the gum. It would be something that keeps your mouth busy, but typically you need to find something in order to keep your hands busy as well. If somebody is going to stop smoking. Again, other ways to reduce stress. Making sure that you're avoiding triggers and that you're not spending time around a bunch of other people who are smoking. So those are a lot of different things that kind of, take it into that will help. But again, any kind of disease that is known on the face of the planet, smoking makes it worse. And that should be one of those things that you should have as a goal. And making sure that you take care of your heart, making sure that, again, you are trying to reduce those cardiovascular risk factors, like controlling obesity, blood pressure, diabetes, and other things that can affect your cognitive health. Again, those are things that are specifically there. Again, the obesity, blood pressure, diabetes. So working in order to reduce body weight is obviously a big part of that. And again, dealing with cholesterol, making sure that cholesterol is appropriate. Cholesterol is not horrible, but again, you do want to make sure that it's not absolutely out of control. And I'm not going to get into all of the different aspects of it, because I'm not necessarily sure that statin drugs and the exact the guidelines that they have on where you should be is necessarily like ideal for multiple different reasons, but I'm not going to get into all of that. But again, if you have high HDLs, again, high density lipoproteins, those are the good ones, because they basically help to clean up the bloodstream. If you have high LDLs, that's not so good. So for example, somebody that has a good ratio of HDL cholesterol to total cholesterol, that's actually good. And you can have higher levels of cholesterol and it's not be so bad for you, right? So, but again, this is not something that I'm working with or treating people on a regular basis. So again, you got to go with your doctor on those different aspects. So blood pressure is another thing. Making sure that they are under control is definitely something that you need to take into account. So again, making sure that you're working on diet, making sure that you're working on stress, making sure that you're losing weight. That will affect both of those, making sure that that gets back to normal. Making sure that you are safe. So if you're doing different stuff, again, riding in the car, you have to wear a seatbelt. And that's not nearly as much of an issue now as what it used to be, but using a helmet when you're riding a bike, doing different stuff in order to help prevent falls. Because again, a lot of these things end up being issues that comes down to people having problems later on. So if somebody that's not very active right? If you have this inactivity, that means that your balance typically isn't going to be all that great. Your coordination won't be that great. People won't have great flexibility. So that increases your risk of falling. Making sure that you're actually staying physically active will stop you from falling, typically, for the most part. Again, doing things like yoga, if you end up needing a more low impact type of activity, so you don't necessarily get the pounding on your joints, can be something that's helpful. Swimming can be super helpful. But again, using a bike, cycling, again, running has the tendency to create a lot of pounding on people. But again, it's one of those kind of things where it depends on what the person is doing. If you're running on a regular basis, or if you're trying to move and run a little bit better, then you'll have the tendency to, again, even with that, you'll start getting your balance better and everything will start to get better overall. Making sure that you end up having your vision check. Making sure that you don't have poor vision will be something that will stop you from falling over things that you might not see, right? So other obstacles that are in your path. Making sure that you control, or that you're at least aware of medications that might cause problems with dizziness or dehydration. Those things can lead to falls as well. And just making sure that you're checking loose rugs and stuff like that to make sure that there isn't any kind of issues that you don't actually trip. But again, there's a bunch of different issues. And again, it comes back to one of the examples of safety is also making sure that you take care of your body and different aspects of that. Like after a car accident, it's really, really, really common for people to have concussions after a car accident. And that's something that needs to be addressed. So if you have a car accident, you should probably go and see somebody that can help you. An example would be somebody who's a chiropractor, can help out when it comes to neck issues, but people who are diplomates in neurology, are going to have a little bit of an easier time actually helping with the concussion aspect. So there's other issues with sleep. Obviously, if you are not getting enough sleep, or if you have issues with sleep apnea or insomnia just in general, those are going to be things that can control or cause problems with memory and thinking. Other kinds of things, again, insomnia can be caused by other types of psychiatric and medical conditions. So making sure that you get an evaluation, making sure that if you do get prescribed a CPAP, that you actually use it on a regular basis, or in some cases go to your dentist and actually get the insert that actually juts your jaw out, so that it helps you to take that away so that you can actually tolerate it, and then you can do a better job and actually get some sleep and not be waking up multiple times a minute, which is something that's super, super common. Again, taking care of allergies, arthritis, asthma, chronic back and low back problems, chronic pain at night, keeping people up, again, is not a good thing. So making sure that you have a good bedtime routine, making sure that you reduce the amount of blue light that's coming off of the computer by setting your computer display to night light mode, and your phone and other kinds of stuff, and not using your phone and the computer right before you go to bed. Doing stretches, practicing breathing, trying to do meditation, trying to read books, all of those things can try to help out. Again, obviously, like caffeinated beverages later in the day isn't going to be something that would help out either. So dealing with stress, dealing with other kinds of anxiety, different stuff like that. Again, it's not just dealing with things that are physical, it's also going to be dealing with things that are mental. And there's a lot of things that are going to be associated with that. Again, when it comes to managing stress, again, if you can help to manage your stress or learn how to frame it or deal with stress, again, it depends on what the stress is, but you should learn how to deal with the stress that you've been given. Chronic pain is something that is a major issue, because there's a nice little cycle that happens where people end up having chronic pain, and that chronic pain leads to depression, and the depression ends up leading back to chronic pain, and you end up having this nasty cycle that goes back and forth. And when I'm in the office and treating patients, I'm typically dealing, obviously, with chronic pain issues, but I can't really help with the whole mental aspect and the depression. I can get people to try to exercise and do other kinds of stuff, but I'm not trained to be able to teach somebody how to actually work with what they're given and try to deal with the stress that they have. So mental health professionals are going to be somebody that is definitely going to be able to help out with that. But, again, there's other things that can help, that physically can help to manage stress. So examples of that would be physical activity, That's, again, going back to exercise. It helps a whole bunch of stuff. Deep breathing helps to lower cortisol levels or the stress hormone. Yoga is going to be something, again, that helps to, it's low impact, but it also does stretching. It's relaxing. You can get into meditation during yoga or in other types of just sitting and learning how to meditate. Having somebody that can teach you how to do that is going to be something that is helpful, but there's also apps that are available for you to do that as well. Doing a moving type of meditation like Tai Chi would be something that would be extremely helpful as well. And there's things with essential oils that can be done as well, but you can also do journaling. There's basically studies that are shown that people that have fibromyalgia that started after some kind of physical and emotional type of trauma, that if they actually journal, that while they journal about what's going on, that it actually can help to decrease the amount of pain that they actually feel. And again, that would be something that I would tell you to do under the coaching of somebody who knew what they were doing. But that's going to be a big thing that you can actually use to help affect problems. So again, getting involved, being socially engaged. It's not just going out with friends, but it's also doing other socially activities that might be meaningful to you, or even things that might be a little bit scary. So going out and getting involved in the local community, networking for people that are involved in business, going and volunteering at the library for any number of different things, soup kitchens and all that other kind of stuff. You could teach English or read to children or teach English to people, somebody that is, English as a second language, if that's something that you're passionate about. Helps at, the park, especially like in the springtime when everybody's getting ready. Parks are always looking for volunteers to be able to help. Animal shelters looking to care for animals and take them out for walks and pet them and doing different stuff like that. If you know how to sing, great, join a choir. If you don't, take singing lessons and learn how. Getting into a book club or starting one, getting your friends together and actually doing stuff like that and having discussions about stuff would be helpful. And then again, the whole idea is that challenging yourself, again, from the standpoint of like exercise, again, we want to push ourselves to make what we can do bigger and bigger and bigger. It's the same thing when it comes to the brain. So if you aren't great at something, it's working on the things that you're not great at, which is really going to give you a lot of benefit as opposed to the things that you're like naturally gifted at. So learning a new skill, right? Again, learning how to play an instrument, different kind of games or strategy, again, bridge, euchre, hearts, any of that kind of stuff. Working on a puzzle, doing something that's artistic, or learning how to draw, doing scrapbooking, reading different styles of books than what you normally do, reading a mystery if you normally read nonfiction kind of stuff. Again, journaling, writing poetry, and it doesn't have to be good and you don't have to share it with people. It's just trying to do things that you're not necessarily used to and getting yourself out of that comfort zone. Again, making sure that you're eating good foods is going to be a big part of it. So again, making sure that you have your nutrition squared away ends up being a major part of making sure that your brain works. High intake of fruits and vegetables are going to be part of it. Lower in sugar, and again, making sure that you have good fats. It's not necessarily that you have to get rid of fat, but the fat shouldn't be coming from pizza, right? Again, if you're getting avocados or if you're getting good kind of foods, that's going to be something that will be helpful. All of that stuff can help reduce the risk of cognitive decline. Things like the Mediterranean diet is going to be a fantastic kind of thing in order to make sure that your heart stays healthy, but and also to help protect the brain. So again, it's different things about the Mediterranean diet. Again, focus on the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, and the grains. Again, you can have olive oil, butter on occasion, not that you have to get rid of all of the butter in and of itself, but olive oil is going to be something that's going to be good. Again, you don't want to really use olive oil if you're heating it up too hot. Again, you want to use butter or coconut oil or something like that in those kind of cases. Trying to reduce the amount of red meat that you take, or meat that is going to be grain fed is another part of that's a different thing. It talks about inflammation. Again, working with herbs in order to help flavor the food rather just loading it up with salt. And trying to eat fish. Again, white fish is okay. Personally, that's not where I would tell people to go. I would typically tell people to do things more like salmon, albacore tuna, things along those lines. And there's multiple different things that you can do with that. But Supplements are fantastic things. We could just talk about all kinds of different stuff with the supplements, and I could do an entire lecture just on that. But there are certain things that you can do, and it doesn't necessarily need to be just, again, you should be focusing on making sure that your diet is good first, but then adding supplements to maybe fill in some of the different areas. So one of the most important things that people can take when it comes to general health ends up being fish oils. Again, making sure that you're eating, fish oils ends up having a massive anti-inflammatory effect in the body just in general. So whether or not it's people that have pain or other kinds of issues, fish oil ends up being a great thing to do. There's other things like ginkgo biloba, and there's other stuff that's associated with that as well. But again, there's some general type of health things, but we'll talk about that, I think, on another video, another webinar that we do here. So again, there's all kinds of different resources that you can have when it comes to this. So again, Skillshare.com is an example. You can go to volunteermatch.org. You can look for global recommendations on physical activities. So for somebody between 18 to 64, and again, that's that 150 hours a week or 150 minutes a week of doing exercise, not 150 hours, that'd be a bit too much. But brain games would be examples. So again, like mindgames.com, or there's other examples like that. Working and looking on YouTube for examples of relaxation or meditation, again, different apps that you can find as well. There's all kinds of stuff. And again, finding Heart Smart recipes would be good examples of things to help do for people. So that is basically it. If you guys have any questions, you guys are more than welcome to use the group chat here to post a couple of things. But I just wanted to thank you for being and listening here to this lecture on brain health. Again, if you have any questions, again, you can post them here on the chat, or you would be more than welcome to email me at health@harmonychiro.com. Again, that's going to end up being health@harmonychiro.com. And again, I'm glad that I could go through this with you guys. And again, if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. And I'm happy to be here to hopefully help you on your journey to help and have better brain health. So that is about it, and I appreciate it. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good night.